Little girl found a lonely cowboy in the dumpster. What happened next? Shocked everyone. Rain drummed against the windows of the Whitmore bakery, like tiny fingers tapping to come inside. Clara wiped down the last of the wooden counters, her small hands moving in slow circles. The lamp near the door flickered, throwing soft yellow light across the empty room. Outside, the town of Mercy Creek had gone quiet. Everyone had run home to escape the cold. Clara didn't mind the quiet. Sometimes the quiet felt like company. She hung her apron on the hook by the back door and looked around the little shop. The shelves were mostly bare now. There had been a time when the bakery smelled of fresh cinnamon rolls from morning until night, when folks lined up outside just to buy her mother's honey bread. But those days felt far away now. Since Papa died, things had gotten harder. The town had less money. The Whitmores had less of everything. Still, her mother baked every single day. And every single day, there was bread left over. Clara gathered the unsold loaves into a cloth sack. 3 rolls, 2 small loaves, a crusty end piece that hadn't sold. She held the sack close to her chest and thought of her father. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Every person deserves kindness, Clara. Papa used to say, kneeling down so his eyes met hers. Even the ones the world forgets, especially them. He would take leftover bread to the folks who slept near the old mill. He never asked them where they came from or why they were poor. He just handed them food and tipped his hat like they were the finest people in the county. Clara wanted to be like that. So every evening, she carried the extra bread outside and left it wrapped up near the dumpster, where the hungry souls of Mercy Creek knew to look. She pulled her thin coat tight and opened the back door. Cold rain slapped her face at once. The alley behind the bakery was dark and narrow, hemmed in by brick walls slick with water. Puddles shivered under the falling rain. Thunder grumbled somewhere far off, low and tired. "Just be quick," she whispered to herself. Clara hurried toward the dumpster, her boots splashing through the wet. She reached the big metal bin and set the bread sack down on a dry ledge beneath the overhang, tucking the cloth tight so the food would stay safe till morning. Then she heard it. A groan. Clara froze. The rain kept falling, but under it, buried in the dark, came a sound that made her heart skip. It was weak and low, almost lost in the storm. She stood still, unsure if her ears had tricked her. The groan came again. It was coming from inside the dumpster. "Hello?" Clara's voice trembled. She stepped closer, her hand shaking as she gripped the cold rim of the bin. "Is somebody there?" No answer. Only the rain, and then a faint, ragged breath. Every part of Clara wanted to run back inside and bolt the door. That was the smart thing. That was what her mother would tell her to do. But something held her feet in place. Something that felt an awful lot like her father's voice, soft in her ear. Especially them. She rose up on her toes and peered over the edge. At first she saw only broken crates and a heap of torn, filthy blankets. Then one of the blankets moved. A hand slid free, pale and streaked with dark blood, the fingers twitching in the rain. Clara gasped and stumbled back a step. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. A man. There was a man in there. She forced herself to look again. Beneath the crates lay a cowboy, his body folded and still. His shirt was soaked through, dark with blood at the shoulder. His face was gray and slick with rain, his eyes half shut. A wide-brimmed hat had fallen beside him. He looked like he'd been thrown away like something nobody wanted. His lips moved. Clara leaned in close, straining to hear. "Don't!" the man rasped, his voice barely a breath. His eyes cracked open, wild with fear. "Don't call the sheriff. They'll finish what they started." Clara's breath caught in her chest. She looked at the frightened, broken stranger buried in the trash, and she knew, deep in her heart, that she could not leave him there. "Hold on," Clara whispered. "I've got you. Just hold on." She grabbed his arm, the one without the blood, and pulled. He was heavy, so much heavier than she expected. Her boots slid in the mud. The rain poured down her collar and soaked her to the skin, but she gritted her teeth and pulled again. The man groaned. His eyes fluttered. "Please," Clara begged. "You have to help me. I can't lift you all by myself." Something in her voice must have reached him. Slowly, painfully, the cowboy shifted. He got one hand on the rim of the dumpster and pushed. Clara pulled with everything she had. Together they got him up and over the edge, and then he tumbled out and landed in the mud with a wet thud. Clara knelt beside him, breathing hard. Now she could see his face clear. She knew that face. She had seen it before, years ago, on a wanted poster nailed to the wall outside the sheriff's office. She had heard grown folks whisper the name in low, angry voices. She had heard children dare each other to say it 3 times in the dark. Elias Ward, the marshal who ran, the coward, the man everyone said let his own wife die during the robbery, then vanished like a ghost. Folks in Mercy Creek spoke his name, like it was something dirty. But the man lying in the mud didn't look dangerous. He looked broken. His cheeks were sunken and gray. Dark circles ringed his eyes. Blood soaked through his shirt at the shoulder, mixing with the rain into pink rivers on the ground. Clara stared at him. Her heart hammered a warning in her chest. "This is the man everyone fears," said a voice in her head. "Leave him. Run." But then she saw his eyes again. There was no meanness in them. No danger. Only fear, deep and terrible. The same fear she had felt the night Papa died. "Especially them," Papa whispered in her memory. "All right," Clara said, her voice shaking. "All right, come on." She pulled his arm across her shoulders and heaved. Elias managed to get to his knees, then to his feet, leaning almost all his weight on her small frame. Clara staggered but held firm. Step by slow step, they moved down the alley, away from the bakery, away from the road, toward the old barn that stood forgotten at the far edge of the Whitmore property. Nobody used that barn anymore, not since Papa. The roof sagged, and the boards had gone gray, but it was dry inside, and it was hidden. "Almost there," Clara panted. "Please, just a little more." Elias said nothing. His breath came in ragged gasps. Twice his knees buckled, and twice Clara caught him, though it nearly pulled her down into the mud with him. At last, they reached the barn. Clara shoved the door open with her shoulder and dragged him inside, out of the storm. The rain became a muffled roar on the roof. She lowered him down onto a pile of old hay in the corner, and he sank into it with a low moan. Clara ran to the little cupboard where Papa used to keep supplies. Her hands shook as she found an old lantern, some rags, and a chipped basin. She fetched clean water from the rain barrel by the door and hurried back. Kneeling beside him, she peeled the wet shirt away from his shoulder. The wound underneath made her stomach turn, but she thought of Papa and kept going. She cleaned it as gently as she could, wiping away the blood and dirt, then pressed a folded rag against it to stop the bleeding. Elias hissed through his teeth, but did not pull away. When she finished, Clara pulled a stack of old blankets over him, tucking them close to keep him warm. His shivering slowly eased. His eyes drifted, half open, staring up at her through the dim lantern light. "Why?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Clara sat back on her heels. She looked at his tired, broken face for a long moment. "Because," she said softly, "nobody deserves to be thrown away." Elias stared at her. Then his eyes slid shut, and the darkness took him. The sky was still dark when Clara opened her eyes. For a moment she lay still, listening. Rain no longer drummed on the roof. The storm had passed in the night, and now only the soft drip of water off the eaves broke the silence. She sat up fast. The barn. The man. Elias. Clara slipped out of bed and dressed in the cold, pulling on her boots that were still damp from the night before. She crept down the stairs, careful to skip the third step that always creaked, and let herself into the kitchen. The bakery smelled of flour and old wood, the way it always did. Clara lit a small candle and got to work. She kneaded the dough for the morning bread the way Mama had taught her, but her hands moved on their own while her mind raced somewhere else. When the ovens were warming, she sneaked what she needed: a heel of yesterday's bread, a twist of cheese, a jar of Mama's chicken broth from the cool cellar. From the shelf where Mama kept the medicines, she took a small pouch of dried yarrow and a strip of clean cloth. Her heart pounded the whole time. If Mama came down early and caught her, she didn't know what she would say. But Mama did not come down. Clara wrapped it all in a flour sack and slipped out the back door into the gray morning. The grass was wet and silver with dew. Clara hurried across the field, her breath making small clouds in the chill air. When she reached the barn, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Elias was awake. He lay propped against the hay, his face pale in the thin light coming through the cracks in the boards. His eyes found her, and something flickered there. Surprise, maybe. Like he hadn't expected her to come back. "You're still here," he said. His voice was rough as gravel. "Course I am." Clara knelt beside him and unwrapped the sack. "I brought food. And something for your shoulder." She helped him sit up a little straighter. He winced, but took the bread when she held it out. He ate slowly at first, then faster, like a man who had forgotten what food tasted like. Clara poured broth into the chipped cup and pressed it into his hands. While he drank, she peeled back the rag on his shoulder and checked the wound. It looked angry still, but the bleeding had stopped. She crushed some of the dried yarrow between her fingers the way she'd seen Mama do, and pressed it gently over the cut. Elias watched her the whole time. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said quietly. Clara didn't look up. "Doing what? Helping you?" "Any of it." He set the cup down. His jaw was tight. "You know who I am. I saw it in your face last night." Clara's fingers stilled. She lifted her eyes to his. "You're Elias Ward," she said. He nodded slow. "Then you know what they say about me." He looked away toward the wall, toward nothing. The marshal who ran. The coward who let his wife die. His voice cracked on the last word. "They're right to hate me, girl. Every one of them." "You don't know that," Clara said. "I do." His eyes came back to her, and they were wet and hollow all at once. "There are things that happen to a man, things he can't undo. The town threw me out like garbage because that's what I am." He shook his head. "You found me in a dumpster. Seems about right." Clara sat back on her heels. She thought of Papa, of the way folks had turned their backs on him too at the end. She thought of the fear in this man's eyes that matched the fear she carried in her own chest. "My Papa used to say every person deserves to be seen," she said softly. "Not the person other folks say they are. The real one." She tucked the blanket back around him. "I'm gonna help you get better, Mr. Ward, whether you think you deserve it or not." Elias opened his mouth like he wanted to argue. Then he closed it again. He was too tired to fight her, and maybe, just maybe, some small part of him didn't want to. "Rest now," Clara said. "I'll come back tonight." She gathered up the empty cup and the flour sack and slipped back out into the morning. The sun was rising now, spilling gold over the wet fields. Clara hurried home, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. But when she came around the front of the bakery, she stopped short. Two women stood by the well, their heads bent close together. Mrs. Pruitt from the general store and old Mrs. Hayes. Their voices dropped low as Clara neared, but not low enough. "A drifter," they say. "Camped somewhere near here. Right by the Whitmore place, I heard. Dangerous sort. Someone saw a strange man in the storm last night." Clara's stomach turned to ice. "They ought to send for the sheriff," Mrs. Pruitt said, "before he does any harm." Clara clutched the flour sack tight against her chest and hurried past them, keeping her eyes down. Her heart hammered all the way to the back door. The rumors had already started. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm. Each morning, before the sun climbed over the hills, Clara slipped away to the barn. She brought whatever she could hide in her flour sack: bread and broth, a boiled egg, once a whole slice of Mama's apple pie, which she'd guarded like a treasure the whole walk over. Elias grew stronger a little at a time. The color came back to his face. The fever broke on the third night, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. By the fifth day, he could sit up on his own and lift his arm without wincing so hard. Clara changed the dressing on his shoulder each morning, packing it with fresh yarrow, and watched the angry red fade to pink. They didn't talk much at first, but talk has a way of finding its own path, given time. One evening, Clara found him turning something over in his hands, a small bundle wrapped in worn cloth. He didn't hide it when she came in, though his fingers curled around it a little tighter. "What's that?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Elias was quiet a moment. Then he unwrapped the cloth, slow and careful, like a man handling something breakable. Inside was a badge. It was old and scratched, the metal dull with age. But Clara could still make out the star shape and the letters stamped across it. She reached out and touched it with one finger. "You kept it," she said. "Don't know why." His voice was low. Man loses everything else: his name, his wife, his home. But he holds onto a piece of tin like it still means something. He shook his head. "Foolish." "It's not foolish," Clara said. "It means you were somebody. It means you still are." Elias looked at her then, really looked, like he was trying to figure her out. Then he wrapped the badge back up and tucked it away. But Clara noticed something in the days after. Even hurt and hunted, even hiding in an old barn, Elias couldn't stop being what he was. When she came in flustered one morning, worried about the whispers in town, he made her sit and tell him everything. He listened close, his eyes sharp, asking careful questions about who had seen what and when. He told her which paths to take so no one would follow. "Keep to the tree line," he said. "Don't come the same way twice. And if anyone asks, you're cleaning out the barn. Nothing more." He was protecting her, even now, even here. It made Clara's chest ache in a way she couldn't name. Then came the afternoon everything changed. Clara arrived to find the barn door open and Elias gone. Her heart slammed. For one terrible moment she thought he'd left, or worse, that someone had found him. She dropped the flour sack and ran outside, her eyes darting across the field. She found him at the edge of the trees, down on one knee in the mud. "Mr. Ward!" she cried, running to him. "What are you doing? You'll tear open your shoulder." But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the thing in front of him. A dog, small and thin, its brown fur matted with mud and blood. One of its back legs was caught in a rusted old trap, the kind ranchers set for coyotes. The animal snarled and snapped, wild with pain and fear, its teeth bared. "Easy now," Elias murmured. His voice was soft as falling snow. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." "It'll bite you," Clara whispered. "Maybe." Elias didn't move fast. He held out his hand, palm down, letting the dog smell him. The animal whimpered, then went still. "But it's more scared than mean, aren't you, fella?" Clara held her breath. Slow and steady, Elias worked his fingers to the jaws of the trap. His face went tight with the strain, sweat beading on his brow, his hurt shoulder trembling. He pushed. The rusted metal groaned. Then, with a snap, the trap sprang open. The dog yanked its leg free and scrambled back, then stopped. It looked at Elias, and instead of running, it crept forward and pressed its muddy head against his hand. Elias let out a shaky breath and gathered the trembling animal against his chest. Clara stared at him. At this broken, hunted man cradling a wounded creature, Nobody else would have stopped to save. The man everyone feared. And she knew, deep in her bones, that they were wrong about him. All of them. The dog needed medicine. That was the reason Clara gave herself. She waited until Mama was busy at the front counter, kneading dough with flour up to her elbows, humming an old tune under her breath. Then, Clara slipped down the narrow hall to the back room, the one nobody ever went into anymore. It was Papa's room, or it had been. The air smelled of dust and old paper and something faintly like him, a scent Clara could never quite name, but always knew. His coat still hung on the peg by the door. Mama couldn't bring herself to move it. Neither could Clara. She knelt by the old trunk in the corner and lifted the lid. Inside were the ordinary leftovers of a life. A pair of worn boots, a folded shirt, a tin of buttons. Clara dug through them gently, looking for clean rags, maybe an old bottle of liniment he'd kept for aches. Her fingers brushed something at the very bottom. Something hard, a wooden box. She'd never seen it before. It was plain and small, the wood dark with age, a little brass latch holding it shut. Clara pulled it free and set it on her knees. Her heart beat strange and quick, though she couldn't say why. She opened it. Inside were papers, newspaper clippings, folded careful and yellowed at the edges. Clara lifted the top one to the light from the window. Marshal Ward, flees duty. The headline read, "Wife dead in robbery." Clara's breath caught. There, under the bold black letters, was a drawing of a younger man. Strong jaw, steady eyes. She would have known him anywhere. Elias. She read on, her hands trembling. The words were cruel. They called him a coward. They said he'd run when the shooting started. They said good people died because a marshal turned his back. They said his own wife paid the price for it. Clara's stomach twisted. This was the story everyone in Mercy Creek believed. This was why they whispered his name to scare children. This was the man she'd pulled from the dumpster, half dead and holding a piece of tin like it was the last good thing left in the world. But Papa had kept these clippings. Why? She set the newspaper aside and looked closer. Beneath the clippings were pages in a different hand. Papa's hand. She'd know that slanted, careful writing anywhere. She'd watched him fill out orders and write her name in the front of her books. The notes were scattered, written at different times. Some were just questions. Who paid the witnesses? Where was the sheriff that night? Why did the story change 3 times? Clara's mouth went dry. She turned the page. Blackwood's men were seen near the road that morning. Nobody will say it out loud. She knew that name. Everyone did. Silas Blackwood, the richest man in the county. The man with the big ranch, and the fine coats, and the smile that never quite reached his eyes. The man Mama went quiet around. The man whose name made grown people look at their feet. Clara kept reading. Papa's words grew tighter, angrier. The ink pressed harder into the paper. They needed someone to blame. Ward was easy, a good man with no friends left to speak for him. And then, near the bottom of the pile, she found it. A single scrap of paper, folded twice. She opened it with shaking fingers. Elias Ward was betrayed. The truth is buried beneath fear. Clara read it 3 times. 4. The words swam in front of her eyes. Betrayed, buried beneath fear. Her father had known. All this time, while the whole town spat that man's name like poison, her own papa had believed something different. He had gathered these papers in secret. He had written these questions. He had known Elias was innocent, and nobody else had ever known. Clara clutched the note to her chest. Her heart was pounding so loud she could hear it. She looked toward the front of the shop, then back at the box, then down at the words in her hand. She didn't stop to think. She stuffed the note into her pocket, shoved the box back under Papa's shirt, and ran. Out the back door, across the yard, into the trees, keeping to the tree line the way Elias had taught her, her feet flying over roots and mud. She had to tell him. She had to tell him her father had believed him. The barn was dim and cool when Clara pushed through the door. Dust hung in the air, lit gold by the last of the afternoon sun, leaking through the cracks in the walls. Elias sat propped against a bale of hay, his color better than it had been days ago, but still pale. He looked up when she came in, and something in her face made him go still. "Clara, what is it?" She couldn't get the words out fast enough. She crossed the floor and dropped to her knees in front of him, pulling the folded note from her pocket. Her hands shook. "I found this," she said, "in my papa's things. Read it." Elias took the scrap of paper. His eyes moved across it once, then again. She watched his jaw tighten, watched something flicker behind his eyes that she couldn't name. Grief, maybe. Or something older and heavier than grief. "Where did you get this?" His voice was low. "In a box, in his room. There were newspaper clippings too, about you. About what everyone says you did." She swallowed. "But he wrote things, questions. He didn't believe them, Elias. My papa didn't believe them." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. He just stared at the note in his hands like it might vanish if he looked away. "You should hear it from me," he said finally. "The whole of it. You deserve that much." Clara sat back on her heels and waited. "Years ago," he began, "I was a marshal. A good one, I like to think. I believed the law meant something, that it was there to protect the folks who couldn't protect themselves." He drew a slow breath. "Then I started noticing things. Farmers losing their land. Wells going dry that had never gone dry before. Men signing papers they didn't understand and walking away with nothing. And every trail led back to the same place." "Blackwood," Clara whispered. Elias nodded. "Silas Blackwood. He wanted the whole county, the water most of all. Control the water out here, and you control everything. He was buying land cheap by making it worthless first, poisoning wells, sending his men to frighten people off. And when frightening didn't work, worse things happened." His voice roughened. "I gathered proof, names, dates, enough to arrest him. I thought I could stop it." He looked down at his hands. "He found out. Before I could move against him, there was a robbery. Out on the East Road. I rode out to answer it." His breath came slow and careful, like each word cost him. "It was a trap. His men were waiting. And my wife." He stopped. The silence stretched long and painful. "My Sarah had come with me that day, just to ride along, just because it was a fine morning." Clara's eyes filled. She didn't say anything. She didn't dare. "She died on that road," Elias said quietly, "and Blackwood made sure the story wrote itself. He paid witnesses to say I ran, that I was a coward, that I left good people to die." His mouth twisted bitterly. "By the time it was done, folks looked at me like I'd killed her myself. They took my badge. They took my name. The one man who might have stood for me was dead, and everyone else was too afraid to speak." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. The pieces were falling into place, terrible and clear. "You never ran," she said. "You never turned your back on anybody. They lied. They all lied about you." "They believed the lie," Elias said. "Sometimes that's worse." Clara looked down at the note still in his hand. Her father's writing, her father's questions, and suddenly she understood something that made her chest ache. "Elias," her voice trembled. "My papa, he died too. Everyone said it was an accident. But he was asking these same questions. He was fighting Blackwood too." She met his eyes. I think you were both fighting the same battle. And Blackwood took him the same way he took everything from you." Elias stared at her. For a moment his face crumpled, and he looked like a man who had been carrying a weight too long to remember setting it down. "Your father believed me," he said softly, "when no one else did." "Then we can prove it," Clara said. We can finish what he started. We can make them see the truth." But Elias only shook his head slowly. He handed the note back to her, gentle as anything. "I want justice, Clara. God knows I do. I've wanted it every day for years." His voice was hollow. "But I don't believe anymore that I can get it." Clara did not let his words be the end of it. The next morning she came back to the barn, before the sky had turned full light. She carried the wooden box now, the whole thing, wrapped in a flour sack and hidden under her arm. She set it down between them and opened the lid. "You said you don't believe you can get justice," she said. "But my papa did believe it. Look." She spread the papers across the hay. Newspaper clippings, yellowed at the edges. Scraps covered in Samuel's tight, careful hand. A folded map with markings in faded pencil. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Elias read every note twice. He smoothed each clipping flat and studied the dates written in the margins. Slowly, piece by piece, something began to take shape between them. "Here," Elias said, tapping a line of your father's writing. "He tracked the same wells I did. Every farm that went dry. Every family that sold cheap." His finger moved across the map. He marked them. "Same as I would have." Clara leaned close. "What does it mean?" "It means he was building the same case I was." Elias's voice had changed. There was a thread of something in it that had not been there before. "He got further than I ever did. Look at these names. Witnesses. Men who saw Blackwood's people at those wells." He shook his head slowly, almost in wonder. "He was so close, Clara. Your father was so close." Clara watched his face. The tiredness was still there, but underneath it, something had woken up. His eyes moved faster now. His hands were sure. "Thomas Bell," Elias read aloud. "Your father wrote his name 3 times. Circled it." He looked up. Bell worked Blackwood's ranch. If he saw what your father thought he saw, he could speak to it. He could stand as a witness. "Then we find him," Clara said. Elias set the paper down. He looked at the map, then at the girl kneeling beside him, then at the badge wrapped in cloth near his blanket. For a long moment, he was quiet. "Your father did all this," he said softly, knowing what it might cost him. He didn't stop. He drew a slow breath. "Maybe I owe it to him not to stop either." Clara felt her heart lift. "So you'll try?" Elias looked at her, and for the first time since she had pulled him from the dumpster, something like hope crossed his face. "I'll try," he said. For 3 days, they made a plan. They wrote down every name. They marked every place. Elias grew steadier on his feet, and each evening, when Clara came, he was standing a little taller. He talked about riding out to find Thomas Bell. He talked about the widow whose husband had disappeared. He talked, and there was life in his voice again. Clara had not seen a grown man come back from the dead, but she thought this was close to it. Then everything broke. She heard it first, at the bakery counter, a customer talking low to her mother. "They say the outlaw marshal's come back. Ward. Alive, if you believe it. And worse than that." The woman's voice dropped. "They say he's taken a child, a girl, been hiding her somewhere." Clara went cold all over. By evening, the whole town knew. Silas Blackwood had spread the story like fire on dry grass. Elias Ward, the coward, the killer, had crept back into Mercy Creek and stolen a little girl. Men gathered lanterns. The sheriff called a search. Every fear the town had ever carried about Elias now had a shape and a purpose. Clara ran to the barn with her heart slamming. Elias was already packing. His saddlebag lay open. His jaw was set hard. "He knows," Elias said before she could speak. "Blackwood knows I'm alive. He knows you found me." He shoved a blanket down and pulled the strap tight. "I have to go, Clara. Now. Tonight. If they find me here, they find you with me. I won't let that happen." "No." Clara stepped in front of the door. "You're not running." "Clara, you spent your whole life protecting people who turned their backs on you." Her voice shook, but she did not move. "Maybe it's time someone protected you." The words hung in the air between them. Elias stood frozen, his hand still gripping the leather strap. The lantern light flickered across his face, catching the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard. For a moment, he did not breathe. "You don't understand," he said finally. His voice was rough. "I know how this ends, Clara. I've lived it. When a town gets afraid, someone always pays for it. And it's never the man who made them afraid. It's the one standing too close to the fire." He looked at her, and there was something breaking behind his eyes. "I won't let it be you. And if you leave—" Clara did not move from the door. Her small frame filled the whole opening, stubborn as a fence post. "What happens then?" Elias was quiet. "I'll tell you what happens," she went on. Her chin trembled, but her voice held. "Blackwood wins. Again. He tells everyone you ran. And this time they believe it because you did. My papa's papers stay in a box. Thomas Bell never gets asked what he saw. And every family that lost their water, every farm that went dry, nobody ever knows why." She took a step toward him. "You ride out that door tonight, and Silas Blackwood gets to write the end of the story. Same as he wrote all the others." Elias closed his eyes. "That's not protecting me," Clara said softly. "That's just leaving me here with a liar for a neighbor." The strap slipped from his fingers. He sat down slow, on the edge of the hay, like a man whose legs had quit on him. He put his head in his hands. When he spoke, his words came muffled and low. "Every time I've tried to fight him, someone I cared about paid the price." He lifted his face. His eyes were wet. "My wife, your father, good people, Clara. Better people than me. And I couldn't save a single one of them. You didn't cause what happened to them." Clara knelt down in front of him, so their eyes were level. "Blackwood did. Not you. You keep carrying it like it was your fault. But it was never your fault." She reached out and put her hand on his arm. Her fingers were small against his sleeve. "My papa didn't stop because it was safe. He stopped because Blackwood stopped him. That's different. That's real different." Elias stared at her. This child. This girl who had pulled him out of the trash when the whole world had thrown him away. "You keep saying you bring pain to people," Clara said. "But you didn't bring me pain. You gave me something to do besides miss my papa. You gave me somebody to believe in." Her voice cracked. "Please don't take that back." Outside, far off across the fields, a dog barked. Then another. The search was moving. Lantern light bobbed somewhere near the road, small and yellow in the dark. Elias heard it. Clara saw him hear it. She held her breath. For a long moment, he just looked at the open saddlebag, at the blanket he'd shoved down, at the badge wrapped in cloth lying near his blanket, waiting where he'd left it. His whole life was in that bag, everything he owned in the world, packed up and ready to disappear the way he'd disappeared 100 times before. Then, slow and deliberate, Elias reached over. He pulled the strap loose. He opened the bag back up. And one by one, he began taking things out. The blanket, the tin cup, the dried meat wrapped in paper. He set each thing down on the hay, like he was setting down a weight he'd been carrying too long. "All right," he said. Clara's breath came out shaky. "All right? All right." Elias looked at her, and the fear was still there in his face, but it was not running the show anymore. Something older and steadier had come up behind it. "I'm done running from that man. I ran once and it cost me everything. I'm not going to spend the rest of my days running from the same lie." He reached over and picked up the badge. He held it in his palm and looked at it a long while. "We find Thomas Bell," he said. "We find the truth. And we make them see it. He closed his hand around the badge. I'm staying, Clara. I'm staying, and I'm going to get my name back. The next morning came gray and cool. Rain had washed the world clean overnight, and the barn smelled of wet wood and hay. Clara spread her father's papers across an old crate. She had carried them from the house in her school satchel, tucked beneath her books so her mother wouldn't ask. The pages were soft at the edges from handling. Samuel Whitmore had written small and neat, filling every corner. Elias leaned over them, his brow tight with focus. He looked different this morning. The hunted look was gone. In its place was something Clara had not seen before. He looked like a man with a job to do. Your papa was careful, he murmured, running a finger down a column of names. He didn't just guess. He wrote down who saw what, dates, places. He tapped the page. This here. He's got the same water dispute I remember, the Hollis farm. What's that? Clara pointed to a name circled twice in dark ink. Elias went still. Thomas Bell. The name sat between them like a stone dropped in a pond. He worked Blackwood's ranch, Elias said slowly. Longer than most. If your father circled him twice, it means he saw something. Something big. He looked up at her. Bell would have watched the land deals happen. The papers. The men who came and went in the night. Clara studied the notes beside the name. Her father's handwriting grew smaller there, like he'd been writing in a hurry. It says he left the ranch after a man named Pearson lost his farm. Papa wrote, Bell knows. Bell is afraid. Afraid. Elias let out a breath. Aren't we all? They found Thomas Bell 2 days later. He lived in a lean-to shack out past the old mill road, where the town thinned into scrub and forgotten fences. Elias kept his hat low and his coat collar high. Clara walked ahead because a girl drew less fear than a stranger. The man who answered the door was thin and weathered, with hands that had worked hard their whole life, and eyes that had learned to look away. When he saw Elias standing behind Clara, his face went pale as milk. No, Thomas said at once. He started to close the door. No, I don't want any part of this. Whatever this is. Elias put his boot in the gap. Gentle, not forcing, just holding. Mr. Bell, he said quietly. You knew Samuel Whitmore. The name landed hard. Thomas stopped pushing. His shoulders sagged like something had gone out of him. Samuel was a good man, Thomas whispered. He came to me, years back, asked me to talk. His voice broke. I told him no. I was scared. And then he died. He looked at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. I always figured that was my fault, some part of it. It wasn't, Clara said softly. She stepped closer. You didn't kill my papa. Blackwood did. Thomas looked down at her. His eyes filled. This is his girl? He asked Elias. Elias nodded. For a long moment, Thomas said nothing. The wind moved through the scrub. Somewhere a crow called out. What do you want from me? Thomas finally said. It wasn't a question. It was surrender, tired and slow. The truth, Elias said. That's all. What you saw. The land deals, the men. Written down and spoken plain so people can't look away from it. Thomas's jaw tightened. He studied Elias's face, searching it hard, like a man checking the ground before he stepped. And what happens to Blackwood? He asked. You come all this way. Man like you, they say you're an outlaw now. I figure you want him dead. I figure you want a gun and a dark night and a debt paid. He shook his head. I won't be part of a killing. I've got enough blood on my quiet as it is. Elias was quiet a moment. Then he reached into his coat. He drew out the badge, still wrapped in its cloth, and unfolded it there in the gray morning light. I don't want him dead, Elias said. His voice was low and steady. I want him standing in front of everyone he lied to. I want the truth on the table where no fire can burn it, and no money can buy it. That's not revenge, Mr. Bell. He held the badge up. That's justice. It's the only thing I've got left worth wanting." Thomas Bell looked at the badge. He looked at Clara. He looked at Elias's face for a long, long time. Then, slowly, he opened the door the rest of the way. "You'd better come in," he said. "Both of you. I've got a lot to tell." Thomas Bell talked for 2 hours. He told them about the nights when wagons rolled onto Blackwood's land with no markings, about the papers Blackwood's men carried, deeds signed by farmers who never wanted to sell. He told them about Pearson, who fought back, and how Pearson's barn burned one dry summer night while the sheriff looked the other way. Clara wrote it all down. Her hand cramped, but she didn't stop. When Thomas finished, he wiped his face with the back of his hand. "There's papers," he said. "Real ones. The county kept records, back before Blackwood got his claws in the courthouse. Land sales, water rights. Somebody would have filed them proper." "Would have," Elias said. "But records get lost or burned." Thomas shook his head slowly. "Not these. There was a teacher, Miss Whitaker. She used to keep copies of everything at the schoolhouse. Said children ought to know the truth of the place they came from." A small, tired smile touched his mouth. Blackwood never thought to look at a schoolteacher. Eleanor Whitaker lived in a small white house behind the old schoolhouse, its garden gone wild with autumn. She was a tiny woman, bent at the shoulders, with silver hair pinned tight and eyes sharp as needles behind her spectacles. She looked at Clara first, then at the tall man who stood behind her. "Elias Ward," she said. Not a question. Elias went still. "Ma'am, I taught reading in this town for 40 years. She stepped back from the door. "I remember every face that ever passed through my classroom. And I remember the boy you were before they made you into a monster." She held the door wide. "Come in before the neighbors see." Inside, the little house smelled of dried lavender and old paper. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling. Eleanor moved to a tall cabinet in the corner and turned a small brass key. "I kept them," she said. "All these years. I knew someday someone would come asking." She pulled out a thick folder tied with string. Inside were papers, yellowed but whole, land deeds, county water rulings, the neat stamps of a courthouse that had once served honest men. Elias spread them across her table. His hands moved fast now. "Look," he breathed. He pointed to a date, then to another paper. "The Hollis water rights, filed clear here. Then look, 6 months later, transferred to Blackwood. But there's no sale recorded. No money changed hands on paper." He looked up. "That's not a deal. That's theft." Clara leaned in. "And the courthouse copies?" "Gone, most like," Eleanor said. "Blackwood saw to that. But he never saw these." She tapped the folder with one thin finger. "A schoolteacher's copies. Made for children. Nobody thought them worth stealing." Thomas let out a long breath. "It matches what I saw. It all matches." For a moment nobody spoke. The proof lay there on the table, plain as morning. Everything Samuel Whitmore had chased. Everything that had cost Elias his name. Eleanor lowered herself slowly into a chair. She looked very old and very tired. But something burned in her eyes. "You'll want me to speak," she said. "In front of people. In front of him." "Only if you're willing," Elias said quietly. "I won't ask you to risk what I've already lost." Eleanor was silent a long time. She looked at Clara. She looked at the papers. She looked at the man the whole town had thrown away. "I am old," she said at last. "I have buried my husband and most of my friends. There is very little left they can take from me." Her voice grew steady and clear. "But I will not go to my grave having stayed silent while a good man was called a coward. I taught these children better than that. It is time I acted like it." She folded her hands. "Yes, I will testify." Something in Elias's face broke open. He bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. They left before dark. the folder wrapped safe in Clara's satchel. But something had changed. Clara felt it walking home. Two women outside the general store stopped talking as they passed, their eyes following Elias's tall shape. By the well, an old farmer touched his hat brim. Just barely. But he did. And that evening, in the quiet corners of Mercy Creek, the whispers began. Different whispers than before. Maybe they had been wrong about Elias Ward. Maybe the outlaw was no outlaw at all. The satchel gave Clara away. She had almost made it to her room, but the strap caught on the kitchen chair, and the folder slid out onto the floor. Papers spilled across the boards, yellow deeds, water rulings, and there, on top, in Clara's own careful handwriting, 3 words that stopped her mother cold. Elias Ward, Blackwood. Margaret Whitmore stood by the stove, a dish towel still in her hands. She looked at the papers, then at her daughter. "What is this?" Her voice was very quiet. Too quiet. Clara froze. Her heart pounded so hard she thought her mother could hear it. "Mama, I can explain." Elias Ward. Margaret set the towel down slowly. The outlaw. The one they say kidnapped a child. Her hands began to shake. "Clara, tell me you have not been near that man." Clara said nothing. That was answer enough. Margaret crossed the room fast and took Clara by the shoulders. Her eyes searched her daughter's face, wild with fear. "How long?" she demanded. "How long, Clara?" "Since the storm," Clara whispered. "I found him in the dumpster behind the shop. He was dying, Mama. Somebody left him there like garbage." "And you hid this from me?" Margaret's voice cracked. "You went off alone with a stranger, a man the whole town is afraid of. Do you have any idea what could have happened to you? He would never hurt me." "You don't know that." The words burst out of her, then softer, breaking, "You don't know that." Margaret pulled Clara close and held her too tight, the way a person holds something they are terrified of losing. When she spoke again, her voice was thin. "I already buried your father. Do you hear me? I stood by that grave and I promised him I would keep you safe. I cannot lose you too. I cannot." Clara felt her mother trembling, and she understood suddenly that this fury was only fear wearing another face. "Mama," she said gently, "come with me, just once. Come and see him. And if you still want me to stay away, I will. I promise." Margaret pulled back and stared at her. Something in Clara's steady eyes made her go still. The barn was cold and lit by a single lantern. Elias sat on an overturned crate, sharpening nothing, just turning a stone over in his hands. When the door opened and he saw Margaret Whitmore standing there, he rose at once and pulled off his hat. "Ma'am." He held very still, giving her room to be afraid. "I know what you must think of me." Margaret's jaw was tight. "Give me one reason I should not take my daughter and run." Elias nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. "I was a marshal," he said. "I found evidence that Silas Blackwood was stealing land and water from honest folk. When I went to arrest him, he set up a robbery. My wife died in it." His voice stayed level, but something moved behind his eyes. "Then he paid men to swear I ran. He took my badge, my name, everything." He looked down at his hands. "For years I believed I deserved it. I believed I brought ruin to everyone near me. Then your daughter found me in the trash and would not let me die." He lifted his gaze to Margaret. "I did not ask her to. I told her to be afraid of me. She told me the whole town might be wrong." Margaret's breath caught. "There is one more thing you should know." Elias's voice softened. "Your husband, Samuel. He was the only man in this county brave enough to chase the same truth. He believed I was framed. He wrote it down before he died." He paused. "Clara has his father's courage in her. I would give my life before I let harm come to her. That I swear to you." For a long moment, Margaret did not move. Then she walked to the table where the lantern glowed, and she looked at the papers Clara laid there. Her fingers touched Samuel's handwriting, and her eyes filled. "He never stopped," she whispered. "All these years I thought his fight died with him." She looked up at Elias. The fear had gone out of her face. In its place was something steadier. "Then it did not die," she said. "Tell me what you need. I am going to help you." The attic of the Whitmore home smelled of dust and old paper. Rain tapped softly on the roof. Clara knelt beside a wooden trunk that had not been opened in years, and Elias held the lantern close so she could see. Margaret had gone downstairs to mind the shop, but before she left, she had touched Clara's cheek and said, "Whatever is up there, it belongs to you now." So they searched. Clara lifted out old shirts, folded neat, a pair of reading glasses, a tin of buttons, her father's things. Each one made her throat go tight. She could almost smell him in the wool, that mix of flour and pipe smoke. "He kept everything," she said softly. Elias watched her with careful eyes. "Men like your father don't throw much away, not memories, not truth." Clara reached deeper. Her fingers found the bottom of the trunk. And then something odd. The wood did not feel right. One board sat higher than the rest. "Elias!" She pressed on it. The board shifted. "There's something under here." He set the lantern down and knelt beside her. Together, they worked their fingers under the loose board and lifted. Beneath it lay a hollow space, and in that space sat a small leather journal, tied shut with a strip of cord. Clara's hands shook as she pulled it out. "It's his," she whispered. "It's Papa's." She untied the cord slowly. The pages were filled with her father's small, careful handwriting, the same hand she had seen on the note that started all of this. She held the lantern near and began to read aloud. "If anyone finds this, then I am likely gone, and the truth must speak for me." Clara's voice caught. Elias placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Keep going," he said gently. "You can do it." She swallowed and read on. "For 2 years I have followed the money. Silas Blackwood does not buy land. He takes it. Farmers who refuse to sell find their wells poisoned, their fences cut, their barns burned. Those who fight back disappear. The county records have been changed, but I have found the old ones." Clara turned the page. There were names, dates, small maps drawn in ink, showing which farms Blackwood had swallowed and when. A whole hidden history, kept safe under a false floor. Then she reached a page that made her stop. "I was wrong about Marshal Elias Ward." Elias went very still. Clara looked up at him. His face had gone pale in the lantern light. She kept reading, her voice small. "The town says he abandoned his duty, that he ran while good people died. But I have spoken to a man who was there that night. Ward did not run. He was lured away by a false report, sent by Blackwood's own men. The robbery was arranged. Ward's wife was never meant to survive it. He was framed to bury what he knew. An honest lawman, destroyed to protect a thief. I mean to set it right." Clara stopped. The attic was silent, but for the rain. Elias did not move. He was staring at the page as if it were a window into a room he had never been allowed to enter. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Clara turned to the last written page. The ink here was rushed, the letters uneven, as though written in a hurry. "I have gathered enough. Tomorrow I ride to the territorial judge in Fairview. I carry copies of the deeds, the water rulings, and the sworn word of a witness. Blackwood cannot reach a judge 2 counties over. This ends. God willing, this ends, and Elias Ward gets his name back." That was the last entry. Clara lowered the journal. Her eyes were wet. "He never made it to Fairview," she whispered. "The wagon accident. On the mountain road." She looked up. "That was the day after this, Elias. The very next day." Elias sank down onto an old chest. He pressed a fist to his mouth and closed his eyes. He was going to clear me, he said. His voice was rough, breaking apart at the edges. The one man in the whole county who believed me. And they killed him for it. He shook his head slowly. They killed him for me. The words hung in the attic like smoke that would not clear. They killed him for me. Elias stayed bent over the old chest, his shoulders curved inward, as if the weight of those words might crush him flat. The lantern threw long shadows across his face, deepening the lines carved there by years of hard living and harder guilt. Clara watched him. She did not know what to say. So she said nothing at all, only sat very still with the journal held against her chest. "You want to know the truth?" Elias said at last. His voice was low and rough. He did not look at her. "Every person who ever stood close to me has paid for it. My wife. She married a lawman thinking it meant safety. Instead, it got her killed in a robbery that was never real." His fist tightened on his knee. "And now your father. A good man. A father. He read one journal, spoke to one witness, and it cost him his life." "Elias?" "No." He shook his head hard. "Listen to me, Clara. I am not a man who saves people. I am a man who gets them buried. Wherever I go, trouble follows like a dog that won't quit. Your papa would be alive right now if he had never heard the name Elias Ward." The rain kept tapping on the roof. Somewhere below, a pot clinked as Margaret worked in the kitchen. Clara set the journal down gently on the floorboards. She crawled across the dusty planks until she was kneeling right in front of him, close enough that he had to see her. "Look at me," she said. He did not. "Elias Ward, look at me." Something in her voice, steady and sure beyond her 12 years, made him lift his eyes. They were red at the rims, brimming with a sorrow so old it had grown roots. "You're wrong," Clara said. "And I can prove it, because my papa already did." She picked the journal back up and turned to the page she had read aloud. She pressed her small finger against the ink. "He didn't write these words because he pitied you. He wrote them because he believed in you. He called you an honest lawman. He said you were destroyed to protect a thief." Her chin trembled, but she kept going. "My papa was the smartest, bravest man I ever knew. He didn't ride off to Fairview for a stranger. He rode off for someone he thought was worth saving." Elias's breath shuddered out of him. "He chose to fight for you," Clara went on, softer now. "That was his choice, Elias, not yours. You didn't ask him to. Blackwood didn't kill him because of you. Blackwood killed him because of Blackwood, because that man is greedy and cruel and afraid of the truth." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she let it fall. "My papa died a good man doing a good thing. Don't you dare take that away from him by saying it was your fault." The attic went quiet. Elias stared at her. This little girl with flowers still faint on her sleeves. This child who had pulled him from a dumpster when the whole world had thrown him away. Who had fed him, hidden him, believed him. Who now knelt before him in a dusty attic and refused, absolutely refused, to let him drown in his own guilt. Something inside his chest cracked open. Not the sharp break of grief this time, but something warmer. Something that hurt in a different way. "You sound just like him," he whispered. "You know that? You've got his stubbornness, his way of looking straight through a man." Clara gave a small, watery smile. "Mama says the same thing." Elias reached out slowly. He set his rough, calloused hand over her small one, the one still resting on the open journal. He had spent so long believing he was alone, believing he had nothing left, and no one, and no reason to keep walking through the world. But here she was. "I spent a long time thinking I had to protect you," he said quietly. "Keep you safe. Keep you at arm's length so the trouble wouldn't touch you." His voice broke. But you're not just someone I have to look after, are you, Clara? You went and became something more than that. Her fingers curled tight around his. Family, she said simply. Elias closed his eyes, and for the first time in more years than he could count, the word did not frighten him. The morning after the attic, Elias rose before the sun. He did not have a plan. Not really. He only knew that sitting still made the guilt come back, and moving kept it at bay. So he walked out to the edge of the Whitmore property, where the old fence had rotted and sagged, its posts leaning like tired old men. He fetched a hammer and some nails from the barn, rolled up his sleeves, and set to work. By the time Clara came out with a plate of warm biscuits, 3 posts stood straight and true. You didn't have to do that, she said. Elias wiped his brow. A man ought to earn his keep. Word travels fast in a small town. By noon, Mrs. Halloway from down the road had seen the mended fence and mentioned it to the widow Perkins, who mentioned it to her nephew, who worked at the feed store. People started to talk. Not the old kind of talk, the whispering, fearful kind. A new kind. Elias did not wait for invitations. He saw where the work needed doing, and he did it. He found old Henry Cobb struggling to lift a fallen beam that had crushed his chicken coop. Elias lifted the other end without a word, and together they set it right. He noticed the Delgado boys, no more than 8 and 10, trying to dig a well trench too big for their small arms. He took the shovel from them, gentle as anything, and finished the job by sundown. At first, people were wary. They watched him from behind curtains. They crossed to the other side of the street. A few muttered under their breath as he passed, the way folks do when they are not sure whether to be afraid. Elias did not argue with them. He did not defend himself. He simply kept working. One afternoon, he came upon a sight that made his old martial blood run hot. 2 of Blackwood's hired men stood in the yard of a small farm, towering over a woman named Ruth Cranston. Her husband had passed the winter before, and she had been trying to hold the land alone ever since. Mr. Blackwood made a fair offer, one of the men was saying. Be a shame if something happened to that barn of yours. Fires start easy this time of year. Elias stepped into the yard. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply stood there, tall and steady, and let them see his face. I believe the lady told you no, he said. The 2 men looked at him. One of them recognized him and paled. This ain't your business, Ward. It is now. There was a long moment where the air felt thin and dangerous. Then, the men climbed onto their horses and rode off, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Ruth Cranston pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Thank you, she whispered. Nobody stood up for me since Walter died. You shouldn't have to face them alone, Elias said. Not anymore. Stories like that one spread even faster than the fence. Folks began to remember something they had let themselves forget. That before the rumors, before Blackwood's lies, Elias Ward had been the man who kept them safe. The man who ran off cattle thieves and settled disputes and never once raised his hand to a soul who did not deserve it. Slowly, the fear began to melt. It happened in small ways at first. A nod instead of a scowl, a wave from a porch. Then, one bright morning, as Elias walked down the main street toward the general store, old Henry Cobb came out to meet him. The man took off his hat and held it against his chest. His weathered face was heavy with shame. Elias, he said, and his voice cracked. I said things about you. Believed things I never should have. I'm sorry. Truly I am. Elias felt his throat tighten. That's all right, Henry. No, Henry said firmly. It ain't. But I aim to make it right. Then Ruth Cranston stepped out from the mercantile, and behind her the widow Perkins, and behind her a young father named Tom Aldridge, holding his little daughter's hand. We owe you an apology, too, Ruth said. "All of us." Elias stood in the middle of Main Street, the morning sun warm on his shoulders. He looked at the faces around him, faces that had once turned away in disgust, and found in them no hatred at all, only regret, only the quiet, hopeful beginnings of something like respect. He walked on through town, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, no one looked away. The town meeting was held in the old church, the only building large enough to hold everyone. By the time Elias arrived with Clara at his side, every pew was full. People stood along the walls. They spilled out onto the front steps. The whole of Mercy Creek had come, drawn by word that the truth was finally going to be told. Sheriff Daniel Carter stood at the front, his badge catching the lamplight. He had agreed to let them speak, though the tightness in his jaw showed he did not know what to expect. Silas Blackwood sat in the front row, calm as a still pond. He wore his finest coat. He smiled at the crowd like a man who had nothing to fear. Clara felt her heart pound. She reached up and squeezed Elias's hand. He looked down at her and gave a small nod. "Go on," she whispered. "Tell them." Elias stepped forward. "Most of you know me," he began. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Some of you knew me before, as a marshal, as a man who kept this town safe. Then you were told a story, that I ran when my wife was killed, that I abandoned you all, that I was a coward and a criminal." He paused. The room was silent as a grave. That story was a lie. And tonight, you're going to hear the truth. One by one, the witnesses came forward. Thomas Bell went first. He turned his hat over in his rough hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I worked for Mr. Blackwood," he said. "I saw things. Land taken from folks who wouldn't sell. Fire set. Men threatened." He lifted his gaze at last, and it landed on Silas. "And I heard him give the order the night Elias Ward's wife was killed. I stayed quiet all these years because I was scared. I ain't scared no more." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then Eleanor Whitaker rose. The old school teacher moved slowly, but her voice was firm and clear. She held up a bundle of yellowed papers. "These are the true land records," she said. "The ones Silas Blackwood tried to bury. They show every farm he stole, every family he ruined. I kept them safe because I knew this day would come." She placed them on the table before Sheriff Carter. He picked them up. His face grew pale as he read. Clara watched Blackwood. For the first time, his smile flickered. Then Ruth Cranston spoke of the threats made against her barn. Henry Cobb told of the beam that mysteriously fell after he refused to sell his corner lot. Face after face, story after story, the truth poured out like water breaking through a dam. Finally, Clara stepped forward. Her small hands trembled, but her voice did not. "My father was Samuel Whitmore," she said. "He died trying to tell you this truth. He knew Elias was innocent. He found out what Blackwood did, and he was silenced for it." She held up her father's journal. "It's all here. Everything he learned. He gave his life, so you could know." The church went utterly still. Sheriff Carter looked down at the evidence in his hands. Then he looked at Blackwood. Then at Elias. "I helped spread the lie," Carter said, his voice thick. "I enforced it. I never once questioned it." He removed his hat and held it to his chest. "Elias Ward, I owe you the biggest apology a man can give. And this town owes you more than that." Silas Blackwood shot to his feet. "This is nonsense. Forged papers and the ramblings of a frightened old woman and a child." But no one was listening to him anymore. Henry Cobb stood. Then Ruth. Then the widow Perkins. One by one, the people of Mercy Creek rose to their feet, turning their backs on the man who had ruled them through fear for so long. Sheriff Carter turned to Elias. "Your name is cleared, here and now, before God and this whole town." He held out his hand. "And if you'll have it, The marshal's badge is yours again. There's no man alive more fit to wear it." Elias stared at the offered hand. His eyes glistened. Clara looked up at him, her heart near to bursting. After everything, after all the pain, and the danger, and the long nights in the barn, they had done it. The truth was out. The town believed. Elias was free. She slipped her hand into his and smiled. It was over. It was finally, truly over. The night should have been one of peace. But Silas Blackwood did not sleep. He sat alone in his great house, his fine coat still on, his hands folded like a man in prayer. Only, he was not praying. He was thinking. He knew the papers Eleanor Whitaker had handed over were only part of it. The original records, the ones that could bury him for good, were still hidden in that old barn on the Whitmore land. He had learned of it from one of his men, who had watched the girl come and go for weeks. If those originals burned, the copies could be called forgeries. A clever lawyer could tear them apart. A frightened town could be made to doubt again. Fear had served him well for years. It would serve him one last time. He rose. He took a lantern and a tin of oil from his shelf. Then he saddled his horse and rode out into the dark. The barn stood quiet under a sliver of moon. It leaned to one side, gray and tired, its boards soft with age. Blackwood tied his horse a good distance off and crept close on foot. He forced the door open with a low groan of wood. Inside, the air smelled of hay and dust. He raised his lantern. There, in the corner, where the girl had made her sick room, sat a wooden crate. He knelt and threw back the lid. Papers, maps, deeds with names crossed out, and his own written in. His lip curled. "Should have done this years ago," he muttered. He did not hear the barn door. He did not know that Clara, unable to sleep herself, had walked out to the barn to gather her father's things one last time. She stepped inside and froze. "Mr. Blackwood!" He spun around. For a heartbeat, they only stared at each other. Then his eyes went cold as winter stone. "You," he said. "You little pest. You've cost me everything." He grabbed the tin of oil and splashed it across the crate, across the walls, across the old dry hay. Clara backed toward the door, but he moved fast for a big man. He shoved her hard, and she stumbled deep into the barn, falling against a stack of broken crates. "Nobody's going to believe a dead girl and a pile of ashes," Blackwood hissed. He lifted the lantern and threw it. Glass shattered. Flame leaped up with a roar, spreading across the oil like a living thing. Heat slammed into the barn. Blackwood turned and ran out into the night. "Help!" Clara screamed. "Somebody help!" Smoke filled her lungs. She tried to crawl toward the door, but the fire was already there, climbing the walls, eating the roof. She could not see. She could not breathe. She curled small against the crates and cried out one name. "Elias!" He heard her. He had been walking the road home when he saw the orange glow over the trees. He ran. He ran harder than his wounded body had any right to. He burst into the burning barn, throwing his arm over his face against the wall of heat. "Clara!" he shouted. "Clara, where are you?" "Here! I'm here!" He found her through the smoke, plunging into the flames without a thought for himself. He scooped her up in his arms and pressed her face against his chest. "Hold on to me," he said. "Don't let go." A burning beam crashed down behind them. Sparks rained across his back. He felt fire bite into his shoulder, but he did not stop. He drove forward through the smoke, through the heat, through the roaring dark, until he threw himself out the door and rolled onto the cool grass. Clara coughed and gasped, but she was alive. She was alive. Behind them, the barn collapsed with a great groan and a shower of sparks. The crate, the papers, her father's records, all of it vanished into the roaring flames. Elias lay in the grass, his shoulder scorched, his breath ragged. He held Clara close as the fire lit their faces orange. Somewhere in the dark, hoofbeats faded. Blackwood was gone. And the evidence, the truth they had fought so hard to save, burned to ash before their eyes. Morning came gray and slow over Mercy Creek. The smell of smoke still clung to everything. It was in Clara's hair, in her clothes, in the very walls of the little bakery. Even the fresh bread rising in the oven could not chase it away. Elias lay on a narrow cot near the warm brick stove. Margaret had pulled it close so he would not catch cold. His shoulder was wrapped in clean white cloth, though the burns beneath still throbbed with every heartbeat. His face was pale. His hands, usually so steady, trembled against the blanket. Clara sat beside him on a low wooden stool. She had not left his side all night. "You should rest," Elias said. His voice was rough from the smoke. "You've done enough." "So should you," Clara answered. He almost smiled. Almost. Margaret came in from the front room, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were red from crying, but her steps were sure. She set a cup of warm broth on the small table. "Drink this," she said gently. "It'll help your throat." Elias looked up at her. There was something careful in the way she moved around him now. Not fear, something softer, something like trust that was still learning how to stand. "You don't have to care for me," he said quietly. "Not after everything I've brought to your door." Margaret sat down across from him. She folded her hands in her lap. "You ran into a burning barn for my daughter," she said. "You didn't stop to think about yourself. Not for one moment." Her voice shook. "I spent years afraid of you, Elias Ward. The whole town told me to be. But I watched you carry Clara out of those flames. I saw the truth of you then." She swallowed hard. "So yes, I have to care for you. It's the least I can do." Elias turned his face toward the window. Outside, the sun was climbing over the rooftops. Somewhere down the street, a rooster crowed. Life going on, the same as always. But he could not shake the pictures in his mind. The fire, the smoke. Clara curled small against the crates, calling his name. She had nearly died. A 12-year-old girl had nearly burned to death because Silas Blackwood wanted him gone. "It's the same," he murmured. "What's the same?" Clara asked. Elias closed his eyes. "My wife. She died because of me. Because I got too close to the truth." His jaw tightened. "Now it's happening again. To you, to your family. Everyone I try to protect ends up paying for it." "That's not true," Clara said fiercely. She grabbed his hand. "You saved me. You saved me, Elias." "I put you in that barn," he said. "If you'd never found me, you'd have been safe. Your mother would sleep at night. Blackwood would have no reason to hurt you." He shook his head slowly. "I bring danger everywhere I go. It follows me like a shadow. And I'm tired of watching good people get burned." The words hung heavy in the little room. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Elias stared at the ceiling for a long time. The pain in his shoulder was nothing compared to the pain in his chest. He thought of Samuel Whitmore, a man he had never met, who had believed in him. He thought of the crate of papers. Now nothing but ash and smoke. Gone. All of it gone. There was no evidence left. No proof. Blackwood had won, the way powerful men always seem to win. And Clara and Margaret would keep suffering as long as he stayed under their roof. He made his decision then, lying on that narrow cot with the morning light on his face. "When I'm healed," he said softly, "I'm going to leave." Clara went still. "What?" "I'll leave Mercy Creek. For good." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of sorrow. "It's the only way to keep you safe, Clara. As long as I'm here, Blackwood will keep coming. But if I'm gone, he'll have no reason to hurt you anymore." "Elias, no. It's already decided," he said quietly. "The moment I can ride, I'll disappear. And this time, nobody will ever find me." 3 days later, Elias was strong enough to stand. The morning was quiet. Mist hung low over the fields. and the old barn, where he had once hidden, was only a black scar on the earth now. He did not look at it. He could not. He led his horse from the small stable behind the bakery, moving slow because his shoulders still ached. The animal snorted softly, breath fogging in the cool air. Elias smoothed a hand along its neck, then reached for the saddle blanket hanging on the fence post. His hands worked from memory. Blanket, saddle, cinch. He had done this 1,000 times, in 1,000 towns, always leaving before the sun climbed too high. This was what he knew. This was who he was. A man who left. He tightened the cinch and checked the stirrups. His saddlebag held everything he owned, which was almost nothing. A change of clothes. A little food Margaret had packed without a word, her hands shaking as she tied the cloth. And the old marshal badge, wrapped in the same worn cloth it had ridden in for years. He was reaching for the reins when he heard the door of the bakery swing open. "You weren't going to say goodbye." Elias froze. Clara stood on the back step. She wore her nightdress with a shawl thrown over her shoulders, her bare feet in the cold dirt. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her eyes were fierce and wet at the same time. "Clara," he said softly, "go back inside. It's cold. You were going to leave while I was sleeping." She came down the steps, her voice trembling. "Like you were nothing. Like we were nothing. It's better this way." He could not look at her. "Trust me." "No." She crossed the yard and stopped right in front of him and the horse. "I don't trust you. Not about this. You're wrong about this, and I'm going to prove it." She held out her hand. In her small palm sat something round and gold, catching the pale morning light. A pocket watch. Old, scratched, loved. "It was my father's," Clara said. "Mama kept it in her drawer all these years. She let me have it." Her voice cracked. "I want you to have it." Elias shook his head. "Clara, I can't take that. It belonged to your father. It should stay with your family." "Open it." Her chin lifted. "Please, just open it before you go." His fingers were unsteady as he took the watch. It was warm from her hand. He found the little clasp and pressed it, and the cover sprang open with a soft click. Inside, the face was still. The hands had stopped long ago, but on the inner lid, carefully engraved in tiny letters, were words. Elias read them. Then he read them again. "A good man never stops fighting for what is right." The world went very quiet. Elias stared at those words until they blurred. His throat worked. The horse shifted beside him, but he did not move. He could not. "My father wrote that," Clara whispered. "He believed it. He believed it about you, Elias. He knew what they did to you. He was fighting for you before he even knew you needed it." Tears ran down her cheeks now. "And you were fighting for me before you knew me too. That's who you are. Not the man in the dumpster. Not the man everybody threw away. That man." Something inside Elias broke. It was not loud. It came slow, like a dam finally giving way after holding back too much for too long. His shoulders bent. The reins slipped from his hand and fell into the dirt. He pressed the little watch against his chest and lowered his head, and a sound came out of him that he had held inside for years. "I've been running," he said. His voice was ragged and small. "So long. Ever since she died. I told myself I was protecting people, but I was just running. From the guilt. From the shame." He looked up at Clara, tears streaming freely now, unashamed. "I couldn't save her. I told myself I'd never be close enough to lose anyone again. So I kept moving, kept leaving. It was easier than staying and failing." Clara reached up and took his rough hand in both of hers. "You didn't fail me," she said. Elias sank down to his knees in front of her, right there in the cold dirt, and he wept. Clara wrapped her thin arms around his neck and held on tight, and he held her back like she was the only solid thing in the whole world. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then Elias pulled back. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the watch once more, then closed it gently and slipped it into his shirt pocket, over his heart. "All right," he said hoarsely. Clara sniffled. "All right? I'll stay." He drew a shaking breath, and something like peace settled over his tired face. "I'm done running, Clara. Your father was right. A good man doesn't stop fighting." He nodded slowly. "So I won't." The knock came just after breakfast. Elias sat at the small wooden table in the back of the bakery, a blanket over his shoulders, his coffee gone cold in his hands. He had been staring out the window at the gray morning light, the pocket watch warm against his chest. Margaret stood at the counter, her hands buried in dough, though she had not kneaded a single loaf. Clara sat beside him, close, as if she was afraid he might still slip away. The knock came again. Soft, careful. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the front. Elias tensed. His body still remembered fear. His hand drifted toward the edge of the table, ready. But it was only Thomas Bell standing on the step, his hat in his hands, his weathered face pale and unsure. Behind him stood others. Elias counted them slowly. Eleanor Whitaker, small and straight-backed, a worn leather satchel clutched to her chest. The widow, Mrs. Hollis, in her black shawl. Two farmers Elias half remembered from years ago, and more behind them, filling the narrow street outside the bakery. Margaret's breath caught. "Thomas, what is this?" Thomas looked past her, and his eyes found Elias. "We heard he was still here," Thomas said quietly. "We were afraid we were too late." Elias rose slowly, the blanket falling from his shoulders. His shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it. He crossed the room and stood in the doorway, tall and worn, and the crowd went very still. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Thomas stepped forward. His hands trembled as he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bundle of papers, wrinkled and stained, but whole. "The night before the fire," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't sleep. Something told me to go to that barn. I don't know why. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was just my own shame finally catching up to me." He swallowed hard. "I copied what I could. The records, the land deals, everything you and Samuel found." Elias stared at the papers. He could not move. Eleanor Whitaker stepped up beside Thomas. She opened her satchel with careful hands and drew out a stack of documents tied with faded string. "I kept the school records all these years," she said. "The property transfers. The names of the families Blackwood pushed off their land. I was too afraid to speak. I told myself I was protecting my students." Her old eyes shimmered. "But silence never protected anyone, Mr. Ward. I know that now." Mrs. Hollis came forward next, her chin high despite the tremor in her hands. She held out a single, yellowed paper. "My husband's deed," she said. "The real one. The one Blackwood said never existed." Her voice cracked. "He took my Robert from me, but he never got this." One by one, they came. A farmer laid down a letter he had hidden beneath his floorboards for years. Another placed a hand-drawn map of stolen water lines on the table. An old woman pressed a small tin box into Margaret's hands, whispering that it held her late brother's testimony, written before he vanished. The table filled, then the counter. Papers and letters and records piece by piece, until the whole story Blackwood had tried to burn lay spread out in the warm light of the bakery. Elias looked at it all. His hands shook. His eyes burned. "Why?" he managed. His voice was barely a whisper. "After everything. After you all turned away. Why now?" Thomas met his gaze and did not look away. "Because a little girl pulled a man out of a dumpster when the rest of us had thrown him there." He glanced at Clara, who stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. "She wasn't afraid to see the truth, and we were ashamed to be less brave than a child." Eleanor nodded slowly. Samuel believed in you, Elias. He died believing. We failed him once by staying quiet. She rested her thin hand on the pile of papers. We won't fail him twice. Elias looked around the room. At Thomas, at Eleanor, at the widow, the farmers, the faces crowding the street beyond the door. Faces that had once whispered his name with fear, now looked at him with something he had not felt in years. They believed him. The whole town stood with him. By noon, all of Mercy Creek had gathered on Main Street. The sun hung high and pale over the town, casting long shadows between the wooden buildings. Word had spread the way it always did in small places, quick and quiet, from doorway to doorway. Now the people stood shoulder to shoulder along the dusty road, farmers in worn boots, shopkeepers with their aprons still tied, mothers holding children close. They had come to see something they never thought they would live to see. They had come to face Silas Blackwood. Sheriff Daniel Carter stood at the center of it all, his hat pulled low, his jaw set tight. Beside him were two men from the county seat, lawmen with badges that shone in the light. They had ridden in that morning after Thomas Bell fetched them, the wrinkled papers clutched in his fist the whole long way. Elias stood on the bakery steps, Clara beside him. Margaret rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder. The evidence, all of it, had been gathered into a single wooden crate. Thomas carried it now, holding it against his chest like something precious. Then came the sound of hooves. Silas Blackwood rode into town the way he always had, tall and proud in the saddle, his fine coat brushed clean, his silver hair combed back. Two of his hired men flanked him. He looked over the crowd with the calm of a man who had never once feared these people. He drew his horse to a stop and looked down at them all. "What is this?" His voice carried easy over the street. "A town meeting? And no one thought to invite me?" Nobody laughed. Sheriff Carter stepped forward. "Get down off that horse, Silas." Blackwood's smile did not move, but something flickered behind his eyes. He swung down slowly, boots hitting the dirt. "Daniel, what's gotten into you?" Thomas walked forward and set the crate on the boards outside the general store. He lifted the lid. The papers were there for all to see. The deeds, the letters, the map of stolen water lines. Mrs. Hollis's yellowed deed lay right on top. "We have the proof," Thomas said. His voice shook, but he did not stop. "All of it. The land you stole, the families you drove out, the men who disappeared." He looked Blackwood dead in the eye. "And the truth about what you did to Elias Ward." For one heartbeat, silence. Then Blackwood laughed. It was a cold sound, sharp as breaking glass. He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "You people," he said, "after everything I've done for this town, the roads I paid for, the church roof, the seed money in dry years." He shook his head slowly, as if disappointed in children. "And you would take the word of him?" He pointed one long finger at Elias. "A drifter, a coward who ran from his duty, a man they pulled out of a garbage heap. You know what he is. You've always known." He turned in a slow circle, meeting their eyes one by one, the way he always had, the way that used to make grown men look at their boots. "He kidnapped a little girl," Blackwood went on, his voice dropping low and smooth. "The sheriff himself called for a search. Have you all forgotten? He's fooled a child, and now he's fooling you." Elias felt the old shame rise in his chest, the old fear. He waited for the crowd to turn, the way they always turned. But nobody looked at their boots. Nobody stepped back. Clara left the bakery steps and walked out into the street. She stopped between Blackwood and the crowd, small and steady, her chin lifted high. "He didn't kidnap me," she said, clear and loud. "I found him. He was hurt and thrown away like trash. And he still tried to protect me." That's more than you ever did for anybody in this town." Mrs. Hollis stepped up beside her. "I remember my Robert," she said. "I remember what you took." Eleanor came next, then Thomas, then a farmer and another, until the whole street moved forward as one, closing the space around the girl and the man they had once cast out. Blackwood's smile finally fell. The lies had nowhere left to go. The town of Mercy Creek stood united, and this time it stood against him. Sheriff Carter did not wait. He crossed the dirt in 3 long strides and took Silas Blackwood by the arm. The 2 county lawmen came up on either side, their movements calm and sure. One of them pulled a set of iron cuffs from his belt. Blackwood jerked back. "Take your hands off me," he snapped. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to this town?" "I know exactly who you are," Carter said. His voice was low and even. "That's the trouble, Silas. We all do now." The cuffs closed around Blackwood's wrists with a hard click. For the first time, the rich man looked small. His fine coat seemed too big for his shoulders. His silver hair fell loose across his forehead. He turned to his 2 hired men, his eyes wild. "Well," he said, "do something. I pay you good money." But the hired men did not move. One of them looked down at the crate of papers on the boards. Then he looked at the crowd, at all those faces watching, and he took a slow step back. His partner did the same. Whatever hold Blackwood once had over them was gone, burned away like morning fog. "You cowards," Blackwood hissed. Nobody answered him. The county lawman lifted the yellow deed from the crate and held it up so all could see. "Mrs. Hollis," he said, "this land is yours again. And there's more here besides. Enough to keep this man behind bars for the rest of his days." A sound went through the crowd then. Not a cheer. Something deeper. A long, shaking breath, as if the whole town had been holding it for years and could finally let go. They led Silas Blackwood away down Main Street. He did not walk proud now. He stumbled once in the dust, and no one rushed to help him up. The man who had ruled Mercy Creek through fear walked out of it in chains, and the people he had frightened for so long watched him go with clear, steady eyes. Then the second county lawman turned to Elias. He stepped up onto the bakery boards and held out his hand. "Marshal Ward," he said, "on behalf of the county, I owe you an apology. The record is being set right today. Every charge against your name is dropped. You were never a coward. You were never a criminal." He paused. "You were a good lawman who got wronged by a bad man. And we're sorry it took so long to see it." Elias looked at the offered hand. For a moment, he could not move. Years of shame had pressed on him so hard, for so long, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. His throat went tight. His eyes stung. He took the man's hand and shook it. "Thank you," Elias said. It was all he could manage. And then the town erupted. The cheer came up all at once, loud and warm and true. Hats flew into the air. Farmers clapped Elias on the back. Mothers wept and laughed at the same time. Somebody down the street began to ring the church bell, and its bright sound rolled out over the rooftops and the dry fields beyond. Eleanor Whitaker pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Thomas Bell stood with his chin high, no longer stooped under the weight of his old silence. Margaret Whitmore covered her mouth with both hands, and tears slid down her cheeks. Clara threw her arms around Elias's waist and held on tight. He looked down at her, this small, brave girl, who had pulled him out of a garbage heap and refused to let him disappear. He rested a hand on her hair. Sheriff Carter came forward, hat in his hands. "Elias," he said, "the county wants to offer you your badge back, full marshal of Mercy Creek. Nobody's earned it more." The crowd quieted, waiting. Elias looked out at all of them, at the faces that had once turned away, and now looked at him with hope. He drew a slow breath. "I'm grateful," he said. "More than I can say. But I've had a lot of years to think about what a title is worth." He shook his head slowly. "A badge didn't save me. This town didn't save me. A little girl did when she chose to see me. He looked down at Clara, then back at the crowd. "I don't just want my old name back," Elias said. "I want to build something here. A real life. A home. I want to stay." The morning sun came up soft and gold over Mercy Creek, and the sound of hammers filled the air. Where the old barn had stood, black and broken after the fire, something new was rising. The frame was up now, tall and straight against the blue sky. Fresh wood gleamed pale in the light. It smelled of pine sap and sawdust, clean and full of promise. The whole town had come. Farmers who once crossed the street to avoid Elias now worked at his side. Men climbed the rafters with nails between their teeth. Women carried planks and passed water down the line. Children ran back and forth with tools, giggling, getting underfoot, and nobody minded one bit. Thomas Bell drove nails with steady, sure strokes. He had a shine in his eyes these days that had not been there before. A man who had carried silence like a stone in his chest could finally set it down. "Higher on that beam, Tom," Elias called up. "I got it," Thomas called back, grinning. Elias stood in the middle of it all, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat on his brow. His side still ached some where the fire had burned him. But it was a good kind of ache now. The kind that came from work, not from wounds. He looked up at the growing walls and felt something stir in his chest. This place had been a hiding spot once. A cold, dark corner where a broken man lay down to die. Now it would be something else. A shelter for folks who had nowhere to go. A place for families pushed off their land. For widows with empty cupboards. For anyone the world had thrown away. Nobody disposable. That was the promise. "Elias!" Clara's voice rang out bright and clear. She came running across the yard, her braids flying, a bucket of nails swinging in each hand. She set them down at his feet and put her hands on her hips, breathing hard. "Eleanor says the sign is ready," she said. "She wants to know where to hang it." Elias smiled down at her. "Right over the front doors," he said, "where everybody can see it coming up the road." Clara nodded, pleased. Then she looked up at the walls, at all the people working, and her face went soft and thoughtful. "Pa would have liked this," she said quietly. Elias knelt down beside her. The noise of the hammers faded a little. "He would," he said. "Your father started all this, Clara. He just wasn't here to see it finished." He reached out and gently tapped the pocket where he kept Samuel's old watch. "But we're finishing it for him. You and me both." Clara's eyes glistened. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tight. "Clara Whitmore," came Margaret's voice. "Are you working, or are you slowing down my best carpenter?" They looked up. Margaret stood there with a tray of fresh bread rolls, still warm from the bakery, steam curling off them into the cool air. She wore an apron dusted with flour, and there was flour on her cheek too, and she was laughing. Clara laughed back. "Both, Mama." Margaret came and set the tray on a workbench. The men whooped and gathered round, and hands reached out for the warm bread. Margaret handed Elias one last, catching his eye. "You've been working since sunup," she said softly. "Eat something." "Yes, ma'am," Elias said. Their fingers brushed as he took the roll. Neither of them pulled away too quick. Margaret smiled, small and warm, and turned back to hand out the rest. Elias stood there, in the middle of it all, the bread warm in his hand, the sun on his face. He looked at Clara, chasing a friend now around the woodpile. He looked at Margaret, moving among the townsfolk with easy grace. He looked at the walls rising, the town that had once turned its back on him now sweating and laughing at his side. For years he had drifted. For years he had believed he belonged nowhere, that he only brought pain to those near him. He knew now that was a lie. This was a home. His home, built with his own hands, beside the people who had become his family. And Elias Ward, the man they threw away, had finally found where he belonged. The seasons turned slow and sweet in Mercy Creek. Months passed. The barn was finished now, standing proud at the edge of the Whitmore land. The sign hung over the front doors, just where Elias had said it should go. "The Found Home," it read, in letters Eleanor had painted by hand. "Because nobody is disposable." Folks passing on the road would slow down to read it, and more than a few would take off their hats. And the bakery. Oh, the bakery. It hummed with life from before dawn until well after dark. The little bell over the door jingled all day long. Word had spread far beyond Mercy Creek about Margaret Whitmore's bread, and now wagons came from 3 counties over just to fill their baskets. The shelves that once stood half empty now groaned under fresh loaves, golden rolls, pies with lattice tops, and cinnamon buns that made your mouth water clear across the street. The town had done that. After all the years of fear and silence, the people had come together. They had chosen the Whitmores. They had chosen kindness. And kindness, it turned out, was good for business. Clara worked the front counter most afternoons, once her schooling was done. She had a way with folks, a warmth that put them at ease. She remembered their names. She remembered their troubles. When old Widow Haynes came in short on coin, Clara would slip an extra roll into her basket and pretend she hadn't. Her father's daughter, through and through. Elias was there most every day, too. He had a table by the window where he took his coffee each morning, watching the town wake up. Folks stopped to shake his hand now. Children waved at him. Sheriff Carter tipped his hat and called him Marshal, though Elias had turned down the badge when they offered it back. "I've got a different job now," he'd said. That job was standing guard over one small family, walking Clara to school on cold mornings, fixing the loose board on the bakery step, chasing off the stray dogs that sniffed around the flour sacks. Being there. Just being there. One evening, when the last customer had gone and the sign in the window was turned to closed, Clara found Elias out back. He sat on an overturned crate, near the spot where the old dumpster used to be. The dumpster was long gone now. In its place, Margaret had planted a little garden of wildflowers, bright and cheerful in the fading light. Clara sat down beside him. For a while, neither of them said anything. The sky went pink, and then purple over the rooftops. "You know," Clara said at last, "everybody was scared of you back then. The whole town. They said you were dangerous." Elias gave a soft, tired chuckle. "I remember. But I wasn't scared." Clara pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them. "I looked in that dumpster, and everybody would have seen a monster, a criminal, somebody to run from." She turned to look at him, her eyes steady and clear. "But I didn't. I saw a man who was hurting. I saw somebody good under all that pain. I always did, Elias. Right from the start." Elias was quiet a long moment. The lines of his face, once so hard and closed, had softened over these months. He looked at the little girl beside him, the girl who had climbed into a dumpster in the rain to save a stranger everyone else had thrown away. "You want to know something, Clara?" His voice came rough and low. "When you found me that night, I wasn't just hiding. I'd given up. I didn't want to wake up anymore. I thought the world was better off without me in it." Clara's chin trembled, but she held his gaze. "And then this little girl looked at me like I was worth saving." He shook his head slow, wonder in his eyes. "You gave me a reason to live again. Before you, I had nothing. No name, no hope, no place in this world." He reached over and rested his hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just pull me out of that dumpster, Clara. You pulled me back to life." A year to the day. That was how long it had been since Clara Whitmore had climbed into a dumpster in the pouring rain and found a broken man buried beneath the crates. And now, on this bright morning, all of Mercy Creek gathered behind the bakery to remember it. The whole town had come. They spilled across the yard in their Sunday best, hats in hands, children weaving between the grown folks' legs. The wildflowers Margaret had planted stood tall and colorful in the warm sun. Long tables lined the grass, heavy with pies and breads and jars of lemonade sweating in the heat. The smell of fresh baking drifted over everything, warm and welcoming. Clara stood near the front, her hand tucked into Elias's. She wore a new dress, blue as a summer sky, and her hair was tied back with a ribbon. She looked older now, a whole year older. But her eyes still held that same clear light, that same warmth that saw the good in everyone. The barn stood before them, tall and proud. Its fresh boards gleamed. Inside, cots were ready for weary travelers. Shelves held food for hungry families. A workshop waited in the back for those who wanted to learn a trade. It was a place for the forgotten, a place for the thrown away. A place, Elias thought, that he wished had existed for him long ago. Eleanor Whitaker stepped forward, leaning on her cane. The crowd went quiet. "There was a time," she said, her voice thin but steady, "when this town looked away. We were afraid. We let a good man suffer because we were too scared to speak. We let fear rule us." She paused, her old eyes moving over the faces before her. "But a little girl showed us a better way. She taught us that no one is beyond saving. No one is disposable." She turned toward Clara and Elias, and a soft murmur of agreement rose through the crowd. Sheriff Carter stepped up beside Eleanor. He cleared his throat. He was not a man for speeches, and everyone could see it. "I helped hunt an innocent man," he said plainly. "I believed a lie because it was easier than seeking the truth. I'm not proud of that." He looked straight at Elias. "But I've learned something. A badge don't make a man good. His choices do. And Elias Ward has made better choices than most of us ever will." He held out his hand. Elias took it. The two men shook, firm and true, and the crowd broke into applause. Thomas Bell was there, and Margaret, wiping her eyes with her apron. Widow Haynes, farmers who had once turned their backs. Folks who had whispered Elias's name with fear now spoke it with pride. Silas Blackwood was gone, locked away where his money and his lies could not reach. The county was healing. Water flowed free to the farms again. Stolen land had gone back to its rightful owners. And it had all started with one small act of kindness. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Two men climbed a ladder near the barn doors, carrying the new sign between them. Eleanor had painted it fresh, the letters bold and bright. They fixed it in place above the entrance, and a hush fell over the crowd as everyone tilted their heads to read. "The Found Home," it said, "because nobody is disposable." Somebody started to clap, then another, and soon the whole town was cheering, hats flying into the air, children laughing and dancing in the grass. Elias stood there and let it wash over him. His throat felt tight. His eyes stung. He had spent so many years believing he was worthless, a man the world was better off without. And now, standing in the sun with a town that loved him, he could hardly believe it was real. He knelt down beside Clara. He looked at her a long moment. "You know," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "for the longest time I thought I was the one you rescued." Clara smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "You were," she said. Then she wrapped her arms around him and held him tight. "But you rescued us too." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.